Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. On behalf of everyone here at SCS Global Services, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm your host, Tom Ehart, SCS's Corporate Marketing Director, and our moderator today is Karen Righthand, SCS's Managing Director of Corporate Sales and Marketing. Karen, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Tom.
Before we introduce our topic and today's guests, I'd like to take a moment to update all of our listeners on our event platform, GoToWebinar, and how to engage with the speakers. To avoid any unnecessary background noises during this presentation, all attendees have been muted. This will be a one-way presentation for the duration of the event. If you would like to ask a question, please go to the question section in the control panel on the upper right-hand side of your webinar console. Once you type your questions and hit send, your question will be delivered to the panel for review. Depending on the time remaining at the end of the presentation, we'll make every effort to answer all questions submitted. Any questions that we are unable to answer will be responded to after the event by a member of the panel. A recording of today's webinar will be made available to all attendees and registrants after the webinar has concluded. And with that being said, Karen, we started off our three-part webinar series called Navigating ESG 2 weeks ago with a topic that really seemed to resonate with our audience: creating a corporate blueprint for ESG success, which I think really laid the groundwork for today's topic on ESG reporting. For any company that has already ventured into the maze of ESG reporting frameworks, we hope that today's webinar will provide some additional insights and key takeaways from our guests that can help you create even better reports for your business and stakeholders. But for those who may be starting out on the ESG reporting journey because they've recently gone public, or they're a private company that's building a stronger sustainability roadmap, navigating the many types of ESG reporting frameworks and also the ESG rating systems can be tricky and confusing. Karen, we've got some great guests to share their insights with us today on the ins and outs of ESG reporting and also reporting best practices. So how about if you introduce them now?
Thanks, Tom. Our first guest is someone who has many years of ESG reporting experience and has worked with her company to build a very successful foundation for incorporating data from their entire supply chain. So I'd like to introduce our audience to Maeve Anderson, Program Leader of Fresh Del Monte's Global Sustainability Program. Del Monte has been a valued customer of SCS's since 2012, when they first started with our Sustainably Grown certification and carbon neutral certifications for some of their fruit from farm to port. And our second guest is also someone with years of experience in ESG reporting, supporting companies in their reporting journey and helping them find the best sustainability solutions for their companies. Jenny Orbeck, our Executive Director of SCS Consulting Services. As I mentioned in our last webinar, SCS Consulting is an independent entity capable of helping you with your sustainability questions and initiatives without creating conflict of interest on the SCS Global Services certification and verification side of things. It's been a tremendous advantage to have a consulting arm, and I believe this webinar will demonstrate that. So we're very excited to have this new consulting division at SCS. And for those of you new to SCS Global Services, we are a full-service sustainability and food safety auditing, certification, and verification body that has been a pioneer in the sustainability space, working for nearly 4 decades to advance sustainability in order to ensure a healthy planet and thriving economy that works for everyone. With that, I'm going to turn the reins over to Jenny and Maeve. Please don't forget to submit your questions as you think of them. I'll be monitoring the questions, and I will moderate them at the end. Thank you. Jenny?
Thank you, Karen and Tom, for that intro, and thanks, Maeve, for joining us. So I'm going to walk through today's agenda for our ESG webinar. Why should an organization consider reporting? What are the established frameworks that exist? Which framework or frameworks fit your business? How should you get started? Where are reporting trends headed? And most importantly, we're going to weave in an expert's voice throughout this presentation so you can hear directly from Maeve how Del Monte is approaching ESG reporting. Our objectives for you as a participant in this webinar are to learn the importance of ESG reporting, gain knowledge about the reporting frameworks, which ones might fit your organization and how to get started, and also to understand where reporting trends are headed. And lastly, learn again from Monte's direct experience with ESG reporting. As we begin to dig into the sustainability frameworks, I want to make sure, first of all, that we all have the same base understanding of what ESG means. ESG refers to an organization's economic, environmental, and social impacts. Examples of environmental impacts include climate change, water, and biodiversity. Personally, I have to admit I've sometimes found the boundaries and overlaps between social and governance criteria to be confusing. Here is how I have come to delineate this, although I would admit there's still some potential overlap here. In general, social criteria cover an extremely wide range of potential issues. However, all of them are essentially about social relationships. Examples include working conditions, human rights, and diversity and inclusion. Governance in the context of ESG is essentially about how a company is managed by those in leadership and executive leadership roles. Examples are, for this, organizational transparency, board and leadership diversity, among many others. I have worked in sustainability for more than 2 decades, and I have to admit, I personally find the array of frameworks daunting to keep up with and make sense of. There are a wide variety of criteria evaluated from framework to framework. There are existing frameworks that get updated and amended. There are new frameworks that are added. There are growing and ever-shifting expectations on reporting, including some recent movement toward compulsory reporting. There are frameworks that you voluntarily report to, and also agencies that rate and score your company regardless, let alone an abundance of jargon and acronyms. You have, for example, GRI, MSCI, B Corp, CDP, Sustainalytics, TCFD, SASB, and many others. And this is not an exhaustive list by any means. Overall, a common concern among companies, investors, asset managers, and other stakeholders is there's a lack of uniform standard or standards that permits reliable, meaningful, and consistent comparability. The hope today is we will help provide more clarity throughout the webinar about how the frameworks compare and differ, where reporting trends are headed, and leave you with many of your questions answered. First, let's start off with why a company should consider reporting in the first place. According to BlackRock, which has been a staunch advocate for reporting and climate action, the majority of sustainable indexes outperformed peers in 2020. This outperformance was even more pronounced during the first quarter downturn at 94%, and that's with the onset of the pandemic. According to a recent Edelman report, nearly 100% of investors are using ESG rating agencies as part of their investment decisions and valuation criteria. And according to Capgemini, 79% of consumers are making purchasing preferences based on social responsibility, inclusiveness, or environmental impact. And COVID-19 has only increased consumer commitment to sustainability. Overall, businesses are seeing the demand for sustainability hit them from all sides simultaneously, from investors, from stakeholders, from clients, and customers. And the trend is to respond and report. A recent KPMG study found 96% of the world's largest 250 companies report on their sustainability performance, and 80% of the largest 100 firms in 52 countries also do so. There are many and honestly a growing list of reasons to report. It can be to manage business and investor risks, including responding and preparing for climate change. It can be to establish a long-term strategy for your company and drive business improvements and gain competitive advantage. It can help in retaining top talent and maintaining or growing your client base. It can be simply that you are being requested to by investors, clients, a brand, your organizational leadership. Honestly, there's only going to be an increasing demand for and an intensifying focus on ESG reporting from here. In fact, in a growing number of jurisdictions, public reporting of sustainability information is starting to become compulsory, For example, all but 5 G20 countries have mandatory corporate reporting schemes in place for climate-related risks and opportunities. In many places, such requirements extend well beyond just the impacts of climate change. For example, with the NFR directive, the European Union requires that large companies publish reports on the policies they implement in relation to environmental protection, social responsibility and treatment of employees, respect for human rights, anti-corruption and bribery, and diversity on company boards. As mentioned before, we thought it would be really important to weave in the voice of an expert from an organization that is on its own sustainability reporting journey. Maeve, can you tell us the background and history of why Monte decided to report?
Sure, thanks Jenny, and thank you so much for including me on this webinar. We're really excited to share some of the progress we've made at Fresh Del Monte Produce. So my name is Maeve Anderson, and I'm the Global Sustainability Program Leader for Fresh Del Monte. And for us, we decided to report mainly because we realized that sustainability was becoming more and more important to our customers and our investors. We've been undergoing sustainability programs for a very long time, which I bet resonates with a lot of companies on this webinar, where perhaps the programs have been in place, but maybe the reporting isn't there yet already. And so that's where we were. We had done a lot of work in sustainability in our operations. So we operate around 20 countries around the globe and around 100 or so farms. So our operations had already a pretty strong culture of conservation. For us, we had very much a bottom-up approach to sustainability, where our operations would be involved in their own activities. They would take the initiative in determining how best to enact programs that resonate with their local community. However, we realized around 4 or 5 years ago that in order to keep up with the changing dynamic of the ESG ecosystem, we would need to develop one unified corporate voice for reporting. So we began reporting to CDP Water in 2016, and then eventually CDP Climate in 2018. Additionally, we released our first CSR report around 2 years ago, and that was basically a leveled up report where we had reporting in the past, but it was our first report with our new commitments to sustainability, and once we'd integrated sustainability into the strategic objectives of our company. So definitely it's a journey. We felt in the initial years of reporting to CDP in particular, and I believe we'll touch on this more later on, but we felt that our scores weren't reflecting the progress we've made. So we decided to really prioritize advancing our disclosure capabilities, partnering with SES Consulting in order to do so, to really make sure we had the third-party support we needed in order to get the scores we felt reflected the progress we'd been making. So all that being said, I would say the biggest reason why we decided to report was because of the increased pressure from retailers, our customers, and our investors. And we really see sustainability as something that's required at this point. It's something that each company needs to be enacting programs and making transparent communication about their progress.
Thanks, Maeve, for that background. Now we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive into a select set of reporting frameworks. The Global Reporting Initiative, also known as GRI, was established in 1997 and covers environmental, social, and economic criteria. Participants, which range from businesses, investors, and government, are not graded or scored on their performance. More than 10,000 organizations currently report on a global basis. Typically, companies complete their GRI reporting annually or biannually in the first or second quarter with the data from the previous year and incorporate it into a company written report. From our research, GRI is one of the most widely used sustainability reporting frameworks globally. Two unique traits about GRI include that materiality is integral to the reporting process. Material topics are topics that reflect your organization's most significant impacts on the economy, environment, and people. And if you want to learn more about materiality, our team did a great webinar 2 weeks ago, which you can pull up and delve into this in more detail. Additionally, GRI is the standard for the UN Global Compact, a voluntary initiative based on CEO commitments to implement universal sustainability principles. CDP, which was previously known as the Carbon Disclosure Project, they now just go by CDP, was established in 2000 as an environmental and governance disclosure system for a range of organization types in the specific areas of climate change, water security, forests, and supply chain. More than 10,000 organizations also currently report to this framework. CDP reviews responses and provides scores, with A being the best score and D as the lowest score. Companies are rated with an F if they were asked to report by an investor or a customer, but failed to report altogether. Typically, the reporting period opens beginning in April for data from the previous calendar year and closes at the end of July for climate change, water security, and forests, and closes in August for supply chains. If data is submitted by the designated deadlines, CDP makes scores available by the end of the year. Responses are submitted through either long or short form questionnaires through the CDP online response system. They've moved this reporting to online recently. Organizations are eligible to complete a minimum version which contains fewer questions and no sector-specific questions or data points if they're disclosing the questionnaire for the first time, or if they have an annual revenue of less than $250 million. Uniquely, scoring methodologies are made available by CDP for review and evaluation. There is a specified reporting timeframe, and all focus is on environmental and governance issues, not social. The next two reporting frameworks focus specifically on financially material sustainability information. The focus words here again are financially material. Generally, this information is used by investors to evaluate a company's riskiness for investment. Investors are beginning to truly embrace that ESG risks are business and investment risks. The Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or also known as SASB, was established in 2011 to set standards to guide the disclosure of financially material information by companies to their investors. Currently, more than 600 companies complete SASB reporting globally. A variety of report types can be used to disclose SASB data, such as standalone SASB reports, sustainability reports, and annual reports to shareholders. As a standard setter, SASB does not collect the data, provide data analytics or ratings to companies directly. Instead, they work collaboratively with a number of data and analytics providers, which is something we'll discuss in a bit. Uniquely, SASB defines the ESG issues they believe are most material to financial performance in 77 specific industries. In this sense, SASB does some of the upfront work for you in defining what is material to your business type. Here on this slide, you can see an example of this. You can see how SASB defines material issues by industry, with the dark gray boxes being most material, light gray somewhat material, and white presumed to be immaterial to that industry. The Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, was established in 2015 and is a consortium of 9 international business and environmental organizations. TCFD provides a framework for largely public companies to disclose financially material climate risks and opportunities. Again, the keywords here are financially material climate risks. TCFD recommends focusing on 4 key areas: the organization's governance, the strategy for managing actual and potential risks and opportunities, the processes used to manage risks, and the metrics and targets set to assess and manage risks. All of these relate to climate change specifically. Over 1,500 companies currently report. Reporting is typically incorporated into a company's mainstream annual financial reports at their standard reporting periods. TCFD does not provide specific scoring. Again, TCFD data is typically mined by ESG rating agencies. Uniquely, companies are really pushed to delve deeply into climate impacts and are recommended to complete a climate scenario analysis using a TCFD established tool. In fact, CDP has now aligned their climate questionnaire specifically with TCFD. Also, TCFD reporting is being made mandatory in some global regions. The United Kingdom is beginning to roll out compulsory TCFD reporting this year and will be requiring it of all large companies and financial institutions by 2025. Also, in late 2020, New Zealand implemented mandatory climate risk reporting in line with TCFD as well. Certified B Corporation, or B Corp, is a standard setting and certification body that was established in 2006 and believes business should be a force for good. B Corp defines environmental, governance, worker, community, and customer criteria that an organization must meet in order to become an officially certified B Corporation. Scoring ranges from 0 to 200, with 200 being the best possible score. Companies must meet a score of 80 to qualify for certification. B Corp also publishes a best of the world list that showcases the top 10% of certified businesses. Currently, there are 3,500 certified organizations. It typically takes 6 to 10 months to complete the certification process, and organizations submit their information through the online tool called B Impact Assessment. Uniquely, B Corp is open to all types of organizations, including public, private, small, and large companies, and also nonprofits. And as mentioned already, B Corp requires third-party validation through its nonprofit arm of the company, B Lab. We're going to discuss assurance and validation in our upcoming webinar 2 weeks from today, so we hope you will join us for that. Also, B Corp has legal requirements organizations must meet to certify depending on organizational structure and location. Examples include having to update articles of incorporation or reincorporating as a benefit corporation or company and making other key structural changes. For some organizations, this is a big leap to make. The final framework I want to mention is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. While this is not a formal reporting framework, it is tied to and incorporated into more and more sustainability reports that deserves a mention. All UN member states adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015, which provides an urgent call for action on 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which you see here. Examples range from ending poverty and hunger, to securing gender equity, to ensuring clean water and sanitation, to tackling climate action, and creating peace and justice. Lastly, I want to mention ESG rating agencies. I mentioned those and referred to them a little bit before. This, again, is not an exhaustive list by any means, but a sample of well-known rating agencies. These agencies work to provide investors, and in some cases, companies, with ESG data and ratings to effectively manage investment or business risks. Each uses its own proprietary approach to defining relevant ESG criteria, gathering data voluntarily disclosed by companies, as well as accessing third-party data, analyzing the results, and ultimately producing an aggregated rating across all criteria evaluated. The ratings across agencies are generally not consistent and sometimes can even conflict. It's confusing. Overall, though, the number of ratings by ESG rating agencies, as well as the number of ESG ratings providers, continues to grow, and this trend is likely going to continue. All right, Maeve, let's weave you back in. Now we want to hear more about Del Monte's experience. Can you tell us what reporting frameworks Del Monte has considered and why? I know you mentioned a little bit before CDP was a focal area, but can you tell us more?
Sure. Yes, so as I mentioned, we definitely consider CDP when we're reporting our ESG data. Well, I guess in the case of CDP, it would just be environmental data because they don't focus as much on social aspects. But we do report our data for climate, water, and forest this year to CDP. And we consider this one just because, number one, it's requested by many of our investors and our customers. But we also see CDP as a really good way to begin to guide our data collection within our company. So we began reporting climate data in 2018, and we really found that walking through the CDP survey step by step definitely gave us a great idea of what pieces of information we need to consider, especially as a company that's newer in developing our sustainability strategy. It was really helpful in guiding our program and our focus areas. Specifically, CDP has a lot of qualitative data, so not necessarily the hard numbers, but more descriptive characteristics about your company's governance, et cetera. And that was very useful to us to begin to have those conversations internally and start talking about the way environmental and sustainability issues should be managed within our company. So CDP is one. Additionally, we consider investor rating agencies, as mentioned, Jenny, in your previous slides, but it's a little different in the way we address their concerns because we don't submit the data directly to them. Instead, we make sure the information that we know they're looking for is publicly available on our website and our sustainability report. And this can be challenging because the reporting guidelines for their agencies changes every year, and scoring sometimes changes as well. So it's hard to know exactly what needs to be up in order to get the highest marks. However, in order to address this, we really try to be strategic about how we're addressing the different pieces of information that we are posting on our publicly available websites, et cetera. So we underwent a formal materiality assessment last year. We're doing another this year to really expand that effort to make sure that we're covering our stakeholders' concerns, and we're working towards a GRI compliant sustainability report to be released over the summer. And the reason why we chose to do this is because we think it allows us to unify our reporting aspects, but also to be forward thinking and strategic about what data is available. So rather than reacting to various areas that are gaps in our scores, we want to be proactive to make sure we're being really strategic about what information is publicly available and to make sure it's totally complete given what we're asked of by investor groups. And the last important consideration we have, which is a little different from some other companies, but perhaps it's familiar to some of you online, is we really consider our customer requests. So as a large produce supplier, we supply our produce to many large retailers who have their own very significant sustainability commitments. This way, we have to adhere to some of their requirements. So we include their perspectives in our materiality assessment as well to make sure we're hitting the important points that they're requiring from us. And so a lot of this is about recently climate action, about on-farm sustainability, and a lot of those different topics that are covered in their own retailer commitments.
Thanks, Maeve. That was really interesting to learn how Del Monte has approached reporting frameworks. So we want to help those of you on the call kind of dig into picking the right approach for your organization. So here's some questions to ask yourself. What type of organization are you? You public, private, large, small, nonprofit? Who are you reporting for? Investors, stakeholders, customers, yourself? Do you know what your peers are doing? Have you completed a materiality assessment, and do you need to? What data do you already have in hand, and how will you track it? What internal or external resources do you have to tackle this now or on an ongoing basis? Is there any one framework or frameworks that stand out to you? Might you need a unique combination of frameworks to meet your needs? Here we've provided an overview of the frameworks together to give you a visual. For example, if you're a small company, you may want to consider GRI or B Corp. All frameworks really can work for public companies. NGOs and governments have select frameworks that may make sense for them. And as you can see here, the fees to get started can really vary. And these do not list out person hours to gather data, implement programs and policies, and report. So these are just the fees to participate. And some are aspirational, really pushing the envelope of what an organization should do. Once you've selected your framework or frameworks, here's what we recommend to get started. First, plan. Really dig in to understand the requirements of the framework. That's what Maeve said that they really did to get started. Is there a timeline? What data needs are there? Do you have this info, or will it take some time to collect? For example, will you need to conduct a greenhouse gas inventory? Do you need to conduct a materiality assessment? Understand what data you have in hand already and identify the short and long-term information gaps. Second, prepare. Set a timeline for reporting and make sure you set a realistic goal here, as gathering this info can take a lot of time, especially the first go around when you really learn a lot. Account for not only time to gather data, but to write the report and also to establish a team. What internal stakeholders need to be involved to provide or gather the right information? Does anyone need training? Might you want to hire outside help, and for what? Next, collect your data. As mentioned before, this may take some time, and you'll need to consider the timeline accordingly. For example, if you want to report on a calendar year, think about when you'll be able to collect the final info and plan your report timeline accordingly. March and April are really a common time for publishing reports based on the previous calendar year, because it gives that 3 to 4 month lag time after the end of the year. If you're reporting to something like CDP, which has its own timeline, you want to work backwards from the deadline to give yourself enough time. And don't forget about qualitative data. Maeve mentioned this too in her part. You know, qualitative data is really important. Narrative can be a really powerful tool to add color and context to your efforts. Lastly, report. Look at peer reports or reports of who you would consider ESG all-stars. This can help you get a feel for best practice or spark ideas for how to structure your own reporting. Cross-reference and align frameworks. If you're being asked to report in multiple forms, including your own sustainability report, you will likely be able to cross-reference and combine many of the topics. Many folks now align their reports with the SDGs while covering topics that also meet GRI or SASB requirements. Finally, be transparent and true to your company. This is really, really important. Meaningful reporting is not about hitting the right buzzwords, but more about communicating relevant and meaningful information to your stakeholders. Every organization has a different approach to transparency, but the more you can share about your journey, the more helpful your reporting is. If you haven't finished collecting a set of data due to challenges, share those challenges and share what you are doing to work on overcoming them. You don't have to have everything figured out, because these are complex issues, and no one, admittedly, has all the answers. Focus on what you have found really matters to your stakeholders. Previously, environmental reports pretty much included the big three: a basic inventory of greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, and waste generation. If one of those isn't relevant to your company or framework, you don't necessarily have to report on it. However, I must say, at SCS, we believe strongly at this point that all companies should be reporting their greenhouse gas emissions and climate impacts. On that note, Maeve, I was wondering if you could tell us about how Monte got started with greenhouse gas data tracking for reporting.
Sure. So climate action is really important to our sustainability program. It's one of our strategic priorities within our sustainability strategy. So we knew we wanted to focus on climate action and greenhouse gas emissions accounting around 2 years ago when we initiated our materiality assessment. However, we were really struggling with the best way to do so. I mean, I think we're all familiar with how challenging it can be, especially being a large company with a lot of our own agricultural operations. And the available tools we found back then didn't really address the specific conditions that we had for our operations. So we have a lot of growing regions in the tropics, and many of the available tools that we found at the time were more suited to agricultural systems in the United States. So we knew we would probably need some support. And we also wanted to make sure that we had that assurance of having a third party help us to develop the tool. We felt that that would make sure that the information we're collecting is rigorous, but also align clearly with the greenhouse gas protocol and the other relevant, basically guidance protocols that are released by the United Nations. So we grouped up with SCS and they helped us develop our document. And essentially it was a long process where we worked together to really think about the data we are already collecting and find a way to build on that to collect just the additional information necessary in order to create a global greenhouse gas emissions inventory. For us, we really had two priorities for this project. The first is we wanted the data collection to be usable and efficient for all of our operations. We are working with a lot of people who are very busy growing in our operations, and a lot of them don't have desk jobs. They aren't sitting at the computer, they're out in the fields in our operations. So we know we needed some sort of software that would work well with these constraints. And so we also knew that they were familiar with Excel, and we wanted to make sure that the reporting was as easy as possible for our team. So we chose to develop an Excel system that we could calculate the emissions. And the next priority we had, and this was probably our most important priority, is we really wanted to make sure our global teams were involved in the process. We didn't want to undergo an assessment just using corporate data and pull together that every year or have a consultant do the work for us. We really wanted to make sure each facility worldwide was tracking their emissions because we felt that this was critical to start building momentum for climate action throughout our organization. So to do this, each Excel document had a dashboard where they could see their facility's total emissions. And then ultimately, the data would be aggregated automatically from each of the global facilities so we could have those global numbers that are required for these various reporting disclosure groups. And we really found that once we had the inventory, it was much easier to respond quickly to the various requests we get. CDP, for example, has a lot of questions about greenhouse gas emissions. But additionally, our customers and our retailers are beginning to ask more about our greenhouse gas numbers each year. So it's been very helpful to have this in our hand. And additionally, we wanted a tool that would allow us to calculate scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So the SCS team was able to help us develop a document that was able to do that. So overall, it's been a long journey for us, around a year and a half or 2 years to develop this document. But now each year, we're able to undergo our own greenhouse gas emissions inventory without having the consulting group do it for us. So SCS supports us in developing the document, but we're able to implement it ourselves now, which is really great because it gives us ownership over the data and also our facilities involvement in the process, which has been very useful in developing a culture of climate action in our company.
Great, thanks, Maeve, for that background. So today we only reviewed a portion of the ESG frameworks and rating agencies, and even with that, it was admittedly a lot of information. Given the range of options, as I'm sure you're also thinking in your head, a common concern among companies, investors, and asset managers and stakeholders regarding these disclosures is the lack of a uniform standard that offers reliable and consistent comparability. Without a doubt, there needs to be a more uniform approach to this on a global scale, and options really need to be consolidated over time. Luckily, there's been some progress in unifying some of these standards. Most of it happened in 2020. SASB, GRI, and CDP announced a collaboration again last year to develop a comprehensive corporate reporting system. And there are growing calls for SASB and TCFD to align since they're both related to financially material risks, including a call from BlackRock directly to do this. Interestingly, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission announced last year it would be working to create an ESG disclosure framework. I imagine these collaborations will take some time, but hopefully they are moving forward with urgency. Ultimately, organizations need to incorporate ESG as part of their overall strategies. Clearly, ESG reporting is here to stay, and the demands to participate really are only going to intensify for the foreseeable future. Our recommendation is don't wait. It's time we all make a commitment and get involved.
Wonderful. Thank you both, Maeve and Jenny. And now we have some questions. And I do want to remind everyone the question period is open. And if you have a question, please go ahead and type it in and we'll see if we can get to it. The first question that I want to ask is of Maeve. You know, one of the things, Maeve, that you mentioned, which we heard in the last webinar also from Owens Corning, was the fact that you wanted this reporting to be meaningful and engage all of your operational, you know, all of the farms and all of your operational partners and members. And I think that that's an interesting theme that we heard. One of the things that we wanted to ask was just sort of what was the biggest challenge that you came across in your ESG reporting?
Sure, so that's a great question. And really for us, I would say the greatest challenge was just making sure all of our facilities had a firm understanding of exactly what data they needed to be collecting. So, you know, rather than just sending them out the document, we worked really hard to make sure we had a lot of resources available for support. So our company underwent a variety of training sessions. So we held basically in our first reporting cycle, we had one training every 2 weeks for our facilities to join, to bring any questions, and for us to really walk through each one of the pieces of information required. And at first it was very challenging because a lot of the information was new for these facilities. In the past, before our partnership with SES, we had just been reporting fuel, water, and electricity as our key sustainability indicators. But now we had a whole host of additional pieces of information to collect in order to complete the greenhouse gas protocol required data for the inventory. So I would say the biggest challenge was really bringing everyone up to speed and making sure that the data was understandable, and we did this through these trainings. But I would say now that we are on our second reporting cycle, it's become a lot easier, and I think everyone in our team has a better understanding of exactly what information is required and how to collect that information.
Wonderful, wonderful. Here's another question, Jenny, maybe you can take this one. Reporting requires explicit goal setting. How does a company that relies on continuous improvement rather than percentage goals, how can that company be able to report along the requirements of these frameworks?
That's a good question. I mean, it depends on what reporting framework you're using and what your goals are that you've already committed to, but I would recommend monitoring that and really just setting your targets to where you think you want to be regardless. I mean, our recommendation is we've all got to move towards being net zero in the long run because we have to move off of our carbon economy. It's just imperative. So, you know, oftentimes when we work with companies, you know, you may be just starting out on the journey, and that's fine. And you should always be trying to improve where you're going. But ultimately, we should be trying to get as far along that pathway as we can. So that would be, you know, rather than just sticking to the requirements of each reporting framework, I mean, that would generally be my recommendation. We should all be trying to aim for that as best we can over time.
Great. And to what extent does a company engage with the framework owner? What about engagement with the reporting agencies? Is there engagement with the rating agencies? So I guess it's kind of a multi-part question about engagement with frameworks and rating agencies.
Yeah. So, you know, I think there's definitely opportunity for engagement. It seems more like the rating frameworks. For example, you know, you can participate in training that's provided by some of the standard owners, right? CDP offers training. There's a variety of trainings you can participate in, and there's, you know, you can ask and engage on questions, and it really, again, it varies from entity, standard owner, or framework to framework. The rating agencies, I might ask Maeve to jump in on this if she's had any experience with this. My guess is, they're mining data more behind the scenes, and you'd probably want to be acting more on a proactive basis, as Maeve gave an example of wanting to understand what they're evaluating in their ratings, but they really don't make a lot of information transparent, right? Like, how do they rate? How do they go? What is their process for figuring out what their ultimate rating is? It's proprietary and internal. So generally, there are less active audience to engage with. But from my understanding, but Maeve, I just wonder if you've had any different experience than that.
Sure. So I would say you're definitely right. It can be challenging to get a really good understanding of exactly how you're rating. The good news is you do get a very thorough scorecard basically each year from some of these rating agencies, which gives you your overall score, but a lot of times it will break it down into different categories. So, for example, there'll be a climate section or a water stewardship section, and then social indicators as well. And so you can get an idea of which topics you're scoring low on, and in that way you can prioritize what you're including on your website or in your next CSR if you're working towards that. So we definitely consider that when we are kicking off our 2021 CSR process. We went through a thorough analysis of our scores and basically underwent a gap analysis to see which topics we are scoring the lowest on and how we can improve.
Great. Thank you, Maeve. And thank you, Jenny. So I can maybe take a first stab at this question, and then I can, if either of you have input. Does SCS have its own tool for collating sustainability data? And I believe, Maeve, if I'm not mistaken, that your tool has a sort of roll-up of data for CDP built into it. Is that true? I think that's true.
Yeah, so in some ways, yes. We have an ability to use Power BI for aggregation, so I can collect our global numbers. And we worked with SCS to design the dashboard in such a way that it was pretty easy to pull whatever information I'll need for CDP. So definitely that was a consideration when we were developing the structure of the dashboard.
Right, and so we have the capability to build these sort of custom tools for companies. But Jenny, I don't know if you have another suggestion on whether or not we have tools that collate the data. In Maeve's case, in Del Monte's case, talking more about GHG, but there's certainly other sustainability data.
Yeah, we have tools in-house that can be used to track data. And, there have been, we have a project we've done in combination with Del Monte that was explained, but I know that SCS is on the verge of rolling out a software and making it more publicly known, some of the capabilities we have for data tracking and generation of metrics and also dashboards. So, something we can share with anybody who might be interested in learning more.
Great. One question that I had is, how much of the information overlaps? Is it easy to report to more than one framework if you report to CDP? Jenny, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sorry. So yes, there is definitely overlap in the criteria and information gathered. So like as I mentioned before, sometimes you can combine reports with pretty relative ease because there's that overlap. It requires doing that gap analysis and looking into the criteria and the standards for each of the frameworks and how they compare. Ultimately, a lot of companies work on their own report that hits multiple standards and criteria. It doesn't end up just being CDP, but it ends up being a combination of maybe CDP, GRI, and SASB data that they've all pulled into one. So again, it's important to do that gap analysis up front. Part of it is understanding what data you have in hand. Part of it is understanding what's materially important to your business. what you should be focused on moving forward for generating data, setting goals and targets, and improving. And then it's tracking that over time. So yeah, there's definitely overlap, and there's a way to evaluate that kind of upfront to see how those line up. And then, there's always shifting too. So like the frameworks change a little bit, and so that can be reevaluated, or you can start with one and add on more. Like Maeve in her journey said they started with CDP and have now added on, they're adding on GRI, and they've also looked at, criteria rating agencies are using.
Right. Here's a question. It's just an opinion, really. Do you believe that return on sustainable investment should be part of an ESG program?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, to be honest.
Well, I think sustainable business is good business, and I think that Del Monte, Maeve certainly spoke to that, but it's not an explicit part of reporting, but it may be necessary for stakeholder engagement, especially at the C-suite level, to be able to demonstrate return on investment for sustainable practices. I have another question that came in here. How does CDP determine who they request information from? Jenny?
Yeah, I can tackle that one. So CDP will request you to report. Typically, that request comes in from an investor directly, like an investor that's investing in your business that wants to know this information, or evaluating investing in your business. And sometimes that request can actually be generated by a client or customer. They funnel that to CDP, and CDP then reaches out to the organization for requesting submittal of questionnaires.
Great. Another question is about B Corp. The site says that the tool is it's free to use their assessment, and this person is wondering if the fee that you showed was for the B Lab verification, for the actual certification. I actually took a company through B Corp certification back in 2007 or 8, so early days, and I don't remember. Jenny, do you know how the fees are assessed?
Yeah, that's my understanding, is the fees are assessed when you're submitting to be, you have your data evaluated and audited and validated to see if you're certified. So accessing the data, you could use the criteria and their framework, to guide your company anyway, and it's setting its goals and tracking data and targets. So, it's open to be used, but if you want to actually submit and become a certified B Corp, then you pay that fee, and it's an annual recertification fee. So it depends on the size of your business, how much you pay, but that does recur annually.
Okay, great. You mentioned EU reporting requirements. Is there a link where someone can view those country requirements? Do you know?
I'm sure there is. Is that something we could follow up with to participants after the webinar?
That sounds great. That sounds great. What is the minimum reporting requirement for CDP, Jenny?
The minimum, well, first you have to pick which questionnaire you're going to report to and tackle. So that's either the climate change, forests, or water security questionnaire. So again, that will be depending on what's most material to your business, and you can do multiples or all. And then when you're starting out, you're gonna submit that shorter form questionnaire. So they give you a little bit of leeway in the first year, or if you're a small business, and like I said, if you're under $250 million in annual revenue, you can still continue to report using the shorter form. But the longer form is then required after the first year. So in the second year moving forward, and it is more extensive than what is being asked for, both quantitatively, qualitatively. It takes quite a bit more time to pull together.
Great, great. And the one last question that I'm going to ask you is, do the rating agencies give you a higher score if you report to more than one framework?
I don't have access to how they actually evaluate all of the frameworks and score companies, right? Like I said, that's proprietary process that they each have developed for their own. And that's why you can have two different reporting agencies give the same company a completely different rating in a specific area. But I certainly think the more that you're doing to make your data available and publicly available, that can be mined, and that you're showing progress and engagement with multiple frameworks, I don't see how that's going to hurt. It's certainly going to help. And maybe you have something to add on this because you've evaluated that specifically for Del Monte. So I'm curious if you have any insights that you can share there.
Sure. So is this regarding the scoring to investor ratings and agencies?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So basically,
themselves.
I would recommend, if you're having trouble, to get in touch with your investor relations team within your company. For us, that was where the scores were going. So we work closely with them now. And essentially, if you have a membership to one of these investor rating groups that were mentioned, usually you'll get the score report each year. In this case, it's really useful because ISS and Sustainalytics, to name two, have a pretty robust document that they send once you get your scores. So this can be helpful because you can dial in and determine which areas you're losing the most points on, or also alternatively, which areas you're succeeding on, so you can emulate a similar structure of reporting for the other areas that you're looking to improve.
Beautiful. Well, I want to thank you both. Tom, I think you can take us out.
Sure. Thanks, Karen. And thank you, Jenny and May, for a very robust discussion on ESG reporting. We appreciate it. And I'd like to thank all our attendees who listened in and asked questions as well. We hope you found this information valuable. Today's presentation has been recorded and will be sent out to all registrants and attendees within the next 24 hours. We hope all of you will be able to join us for our final webinar in the series, Sustainability Report Assurance, How to Verify Your ESG Journey, which will take place in 2 weeks on Wednesday, May 5th. If you need a registration link or have any additional questions, please feel free to contact us via email. Until then, we hope you all stay safe and healthy. Have a great day.